The survey vessel Amaranth was 3 weeks into a routine mapping assignment when Lieutenant Commander Priya Akafer noticed something wrong with the stars. Not wrong exactly, more like interrupted. "Commander," said her sensor officer, a young man named Dax whose voice had never quite learned to stay calm, "I'm reading. A lot of mass signatures. A lot." Priya leaned forward. "Define a lot." 64 vessels, minimum. Some of them are. He paused, rechecked his instruments, and rechecked them again. "Ma'am, the largest one is 4 kilometers long." The bridge went quiet. The Amaranth herself was 340 meters. A solid, unglamorous deep space workhorse packed with scientific equipment, redundant life support, and enough emergency rations to last the crew 2 years if something catastrophic happened, because something catastrophic always eventually happened. She was not a warship. She had no reason to be. Her crew of 41 included 9 researchers, 2 medics, a botanist named Gerald who nobody had asked for but everyone had grown to love, and a chief engineer who spent her off hours writing poetry about reactor cores. None of them were prepared for what slid out of the nebula's edge. The fleet emerged the way weather emerges, gradually, then all at once. Ships so large they seemed geological, formations so precise they looked architectural, hull plating the color of bruised iron, lined with weapon arrays that tracked the Amaranth with slow, predatory certainty. Running lights pulsed in deep crimson across every vessel, and the effect, Priya would later admit, was genuinely impressive. Whoever these people were, they had clearly spent a long time thinking about how to look terrifying. Then the transmission came. It arrived on every frequency simultaneously, which was itself a statement. The translation software on the Amaranth took 4 seconds to process the language, an oddly melodic one, full of hard consonants and long vowels, and then began rendering the message in spoken English through the bridge speakers. The voice was deep, ceremonial. It had the cadence of something recited from memory, the way a priest recites scripture. "Attention, unregistered vessel. You have entered sovereign territory of the eternal Galactic Empire, whose reach encompasses 412 star systems and whose authority is absolute. You are small. You are unknown. You are, as of this moment, beneath our mercy. Surrender your vessel, your crew, and all navigational data, and the Empire may see fit to grant you the privilege of continued existence. Resist, and you will serve as a lesson to whatever civilization spawned you." Silence on the bridge. Priya stared at the view screen, at the 64 warships, at the 4-kilometer flagship whose weapons were currently pointed directly at her. She opened her mouth. And then Chief Engineer Rosa Vasquez, who had come up to the bridge to report a minor coolant fluctuation and had stayed because the view screen was showing something interesting, made a noise. It started as a snort. Then it became a laugh, a real one, helpless and sudden, the kind that happens when your brain processes something too absurd for a measured response. Then Dax went, then the navigation officer, then 2 of the researchers who'd wandered in out of curiosity. Priya held out for 6 full seconds. She genuinely tried, but Rosa was now gripping the back of a console chair with tears on her face, and the translation was still playing, and the phrase, "the privilege of continued existence," echoed in the room like a punchline, and Priya's composure simply gave way. She laughed until her ribs hurt. On the other end of the open channel, Admiral Velthar of the Imperial 7th Armada sat in his command throne and experienced, for the first time in a 30-year career, total silence where there should have been screaming. His communications officer turned slowly. "Admiral, they're laughing at us." Velthar said nothing. His jaw had stopped working. Outside, the 64 ships of the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy waited, and the little human vessel just kept laughing. Velthar was not a patient man, but he was a methodical one. He gave the humans 3 minutes. This was generous. Most civilizations didn't need 3 seconds. The sight of the fleet alone was enough to produce immediate, total compliance. The Evrathi had wept. The Solon Collective had transmitted their surrender before the declaration even finished playing. One species, the Emreth, had simply powered down every system on their ship and waited with what their translators described as spiritual acceptance. 3 minutes passed, the laughter died down, then started again when someone on the human ship apparently replayed the message. "Fire a warning shot," Velthor said. The order was executed with precision. A single beam weapon, the Amaranth would later record it as a mid-tier thermal pulse, roughly equivalent in yield to one of their own cutting tools at full power, lanced across space and impacted 10 kilometers off the human vessel's port bow. It was a beautiful shot, textbook. The flash was visible, the message clear. We are armed, we are serious, we do not miss on purpose. On the Amaranth's bridge, someone said, "Oh nice, look at the diffraction pattern," and another person took a photograph. The laughter had stopped, technically. What replaced it was something harder for Velthar to categorize, a kind of animated interest, like researchers encountering a new specimen. He opened a direct channel. "Human vessel. This is Admiral Velthar, commanding the Imperial 7th Armada. You have been warned. Identify your civilization and prepare to be boarded." A pause, then a voice, female, measured, carrying the trace of something that might have been an apology. "Admiral Velthar, this is Commander Priya Akafer of the Earth Survey Vessel Amaranth, operating under the flag of the Terran Exploratory Commission. I want to apologize for our response. It was unprofessional." Velthar straightened. "Good, an apology. This was more familiar. Your apology is noted. Prepare to." "It's just," Akafer continued, and something in her voice suggested she was still fighting the laughter. "That was your warning shot, right? That pulse." "It was." "A beat, right. Our chief engineer thought it was a sensor reflection at first. She ran a diagnostic." Another pause. "Admiral, what yield are your standard armaments, roughly?" Velthar frowned. "That information is classified." "Okay, that's fair." A muffled sound in the background that might have been someone whispering. "I ask only because ours are significantly larger, and I want to make sure we're calibrating this conversation correctly." The bridge of the Imperial flagship went very still. Velthar looked at his intelligence officer, Commander Sharath, who had spent the past 4 minutes running full scans on the Amaranth and had been growing increasingly pale. Sharath pulled up his report on the holodisplay. The Amaranth's hull composition came up first. The Imperial scanners had tried 3 times to classify it and kept returning an error because the material density was inconsistent with anything in their database. It wasn't battle plating in any configuration they recognized. It was something else, something denser. Something that had been built, the analysis suggested, primarily to survive catastrophic environments. Stellar radiation, micrometeorite fields, pressure extremes, and had incidentally ended up being nearly impervious to weapons. The reactor reading came next. Sharath had assumed the small signature meant low power output. He now understood it meant the reactor was idling. What it was capable of at full output was a number that made him check his instruments 4 times. He met Velthar's eyes. He didn't say anything. He just turned the display to face the Admiral. Velthar read the numbers. The channel was still open. Commander Akafer's voice came through, gentle and unhurried. "Admiral, still there?" "Yes," Velthar said. His voice was very even. "I am still here." Commander Sharath had served the Empire for 22 years, survived 2 wars, and once correctly identified an enemy fleet's position from a 0.003-degree variance in gravitational readings. He was not a man who spooked easily. He was spooked now. "Walk me through it again," Velthar said, seated at the intelligence table with his senior officers. The Amaranth drifted on the main screen, patient and inert, its hull catching the nebula's light in a way that made it look almost geological. "The hull material," Sharath began. "We've run 17 classifications. Closest match is a compressed ceramic hull, composite we've never encountered in any surveyed civilization's military inventory. It's not in our weapons vulnerability database because nothing we've tested has been dense enough to require testing against it." "Meaning?" meaning our weapons would need sustained fire over an extended period to breach it. Possibly. We're not certain even then. Velthar looked at Commodore Fenn, his weapons chief. Fenn's expression had the quality of someone who had recently received bad news about their own profession. The reactor, Shareth continued. What we read as a low-power signature was the reactor running at what appears to be approximately 8% capacity. Their drive systems, life support, sensor arrays, all of it is drawing well under a tenth of what that reactor can output. What does it output at full capacity? Fenn asked. Shareth told him. Fenn sat back slowly, the way a person sits when the chair is the only thing they trust. And this is a survey vessel, Velthar said, flatly, not as a question. They've said so 3 times, Shareth confirmed. Their crew manifest, which they've been entirely open about sharing, which is its own unsettling fact, lists 9 researchers, 2 medical officers, 1 horticultural specialist. A what? A botanist, Admiral, someone who studies plants. Velthar stared at him. They brought a botanist. On their survey ship. Yes. Along with what our scans indicate is enough emergency equipment to sustain the crew for approximately 2 standard years in the event of total system failure. Shareth pulled up a subsystem schematic he'd reconstructed from their scans. Every critical system has a minimum of 3 redundant backups. Their emergency bulkheads are capable of compartmentalizing the ship into 19 independent sections, each with its own life support and power supply. They have medical equipment sophisticated enough to perform surgery on 7 different anatomical configurations, simultaneously. They built their ship, Fenn said slowly, like they expected it to be destroyed. Not destroyed, Shareth said, like they expected everything to go wrong and intended to survive it anyway. There's a philosophical difference. He closed the schematic. Admiral, I've studied expansion-era Imperial engineering. Our warships are built for dominance. They're built to project power. Human engineering philosophy appears to be different. Different how? Shareth chose his next words carefully. They build for survival at all costs. They're military vessels, and I want to stress, we have seen none of those. Only this survey craft would presumably reflect the same philosophy, but optimized for aggression rather than endurance. He paused. Whatever those ships look like, I would very much not like to see them. Velthar was quiet for a long moment. Through the viewport, the Amaranth drifted. A vessel crewed by scientists and a botanist, carrying reactors that could power an Imperial cruiser, wrapped in armor his weapons couldn't reliably crack. His communications officer caught his attention. Admiral, Commander Akaffer is hailing again. She says, the officer hesitated. She says she wants to check if we need anything. Supplies, repairs, navigational assistance. The room processed this. She's asking, Fenn said carefully, if we need help. Yes, sir. Velthar turned back to the viewport. 40 years of Imperial command. 64 ships. The greatest fleet in the known galaxy. Tell her, he said, we are fine. Order from the Imperial Court arrived 6 hours later, and Velthar had been expecting it. The Emperor's senior advisor, a thin, bloodless man named Counselor Dorath, who had never personally been in a battle, transmitted the command with the stiff confidence of someone accustomed to consequences falling on other people. The message was unambiguous. The Amaranth was to be taken or destroyed. The Empire could not be seen to hesitate before a single foreign vessel. Every civilization in the quadrant was watching on long-range sensors. Weakness now would invite challenge later. Velthar read the order twice. He looked at Shareth, who looked away. He looked at Fenn, who was studying his own boots. He gave the command. The 7th Armada opened fire. What followed was not a battle in any sense Velthar recognized. A battle involved exchange, attack, defense, counter. What happened instead was this. 64 Imperial warships concentrated everything they had on a 340-meter survey vessel, and the 340-meter survey vessel absorbed it. Not all at once, not effortlessly. The Amaranth's shields, and she had them, which had not appeared in the initial scans because they hadn't been active, because she hadn't considered them necessary, flared and redistributed under the load. Her hull took direct hits and registered them. 2 compartments lost external plating. 1 sensor array went offline. But she did not break. 4 minutes into the engagement, Commander Akhafer's voice came across the open channel. "Admiral, I'm going to ask you to stop." Not a demand, an ask. The tone was the same one Velthar associated with officers addressing a subordinate who'd made a mistake and was being given a chance to correct it. "We are committed to." "Admiral," her voice shifted, just slightly. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was something else, something patient and unmovable, the way a mountain is patient. "I've been tolerant because I want this to end without anyone getting hurt, but I need you to understand something clearly." A pause, then calmly, "We haven't fired back." The bridge of the flagship went quiet. She was right. The Amaranth had not fired a single weapon. "I haven't fired back," Akhafer continued, "because I'd rather not. But my engineer has just finished her calculations and she's asked me to share them with you." A brief pause. "At our reactor's current idle output, we could disable your fleet's propulsion and weapons systems in approximately 14 minutes. At 40% output, which is the level we'd need to get the coffee machines running, it's closer to 3. I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you because I think you deserve accurate information." Velthar said nothing. "You have good ships," Akhafer said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Good crews. People who are doing their jobs and following orders and don't deserve to be a footnote in someone else's lesson. Please stop firing." Velthar raised his hand. The 7th Armada ceased fire. In the silence that followed, the Amaranth sat in the middle of a cloud of dissipating weapons discharge, slightly scorched, entirely intact, with a botanist on board who had apparently slept through the whole thing. "Thank you," Commander Akhafer said. Velthar stared at his hands for a long time. The rest of the galaxy was listening. That much became clear within the hour. Long-range monitoring stations across 7 sovereign territories had picked up the engagement at the Vale Nebula. The Keth Dominion, the Solnari Republic, and 3 independent planetary coalitions were all tracking the situation in real time, funneling data to their governments with the urgency of people watching a star go nova and not yet knowing which way to run. What they saw confounded them. The human ship, the survey ship, the instrument of science with a crew that included a plant researcher, had absorbed the full firepower of the Imperial 7th Armada and remained operational. And then, rather than pressing an advantage that was obviously and terrifyingly real, the humans had asked the Imperial fleet to stop. Politely, with what monitoring translators rendered as genuine concern for their well-being. Commander Akhafer followed up the ceasefire with a transmission that would later be studied in military academies for decades. She sent it on all frequencies, which meant everyone was going to get it. "Admiral Velthar, I want to offer a full situational assessment shared in the spirit of transparency." What followed was 7 minutes of the most precise military analysis Velthar had ever heard. She walked through the engagement data without editorializing, thrust capacity, hull integrity readings, weapons output ratios. She explained, in clear and almost gentle terms, exactly what the outcome of a continued engagement would be, broken down into probability brackets. She projected fleet loss rates for the 7th Armada. She noted which Imperial ships had the most vulnerable propulsion signatures, and confirmed that her crew had cataloged them all, not as targets, but because we catalog things. It's what we do. She then proposed a ceasefire framework, not a surrender, not terms of submission, a mutual agreement to stand down and open diplomatic channels. The language was balanced. The phrasing was careful. There was no crowing in it. "She's apologizing," Shareth said quietly, watching the transmission. "For beating us. She's apologizing for it." "She's not apologizing," Fen said. "She's making it easier for us to say yes. She's giving us a way out that doesn't feel like losing." The Keth ambassador, watching from his monitoring station 12 light-years away, turned to his aide and said something that would get quoted in every diplomatic history of the period that followed. "We've been doing first contact wrong. Completely wrong." Aboard the Amaranth, the mood was characteristically human. Rosa Vasquez had fixed the damaged sensor array in under 2 hours and was now complaining that the weapon's discharge had left particulate residue in the external intake filters, which was going to be a whole ordeal to clean. Dax had gone back to his mapping survey because the data wasn't going to collect itself. Gerald the botanist had, in fact, slept through the engagement, and upon being told what happened, had said, "Oh wow," and gone back to his samples. Priya sat in her chair and waited. It took Velthar 40 minutes to respond. "Commander Akafar." His voice had changed. Not broken, Velthar was too experienced for that, but it had lost its ceremony. He sounded, for the first time, like a man rather than an office. "The ceasefire is accepted, pending authorization from the Imperial Court." "Of course," Priya said. "Take whatever time you need." She meant it. That was the thing that kept unsettling Velthar's officers. She always meant it. Authorization from the Imperial Court did not come. What came instead, 4 days later, was the Emperor's Armada. Velthar received the news in his quarters in the middle of the night and sat with it in silence for a long time. The Emperor's Armada was not a fleet that got deployed. It was a fleet that existed, a deterrent so total, so historically unambiguous, that the mere confirmation of its existence had ended 2 civilizations' resistance without a shot fired. 212 ships, the largest assembled military force in Imperial history. It hadn't moved in 60 years. It was moving now. "The court has reviewed the situation and determined that the incident at the Vale requires a definitive response," the counselor's transmission read. "You are to stand by. The Emperor's Armada will complete what you could not." Velthar read the message again, looked out the viewport at the Amaranth, which had spent the 4-day ceasefire doing its survey work, filling its data banks with nebula mapping that had nothing to do with the Empire at all. A small ship, a crew of 41, a botanist. He opened a channel to Commander Akafar. "I need to inform you," he said, "that additional Imperial forces are en route, significant ones." A pause. "How significant?" he told her. Another pause. He heard in the background what might have been someone saying 212, followed by a sound he was coming to recognize, the specific register of a human who finds something extremely funny and is trying very hard not to show it. "Commander," he said, "this is not." "No, I understand," Akafar said quickly. "Admiral, thank you for telling me. That was the right thing to do." She sounded like she meant that too. She almost always meant things. "I'll contact our people." "Your military." "Our engineers," she said. "They're going to want to see this." 3 days later, a Terran vessel arrived at the Amaranth's coordinates. Not a warship. A transport, large, blocky, functional, carrying 12 people in civilian clothes who immediately began taking readings on every Imperial ship in sensor range, with the focused excitement of people attending a trade show. "Who are they?" Velthar asked. Akafar's answer, which Velthar would replay several times in the weeks that followed. "The team that designs the ships. They haven't seen Imperial engineering up close before. They're thrilled." The Emperor's Armada arrived on the 7th day. 212 vessels, emerging from transit in perfect formation, their running lights painting the nebula edge in crimson. The sensor readings on the Amaranth must have been extraordinary. From the human side, nobody ran. One engineer said, "Oh, they've got 4 redundant power relays on that flagship. That's actually clever." Another one started a betting pool on drive configuration. Dax went back to mapping. Gerald the botanist asked if any of the new ships had observation windows with a good view of the nebula, because the spore dispersal patterns were really something. The Emperor's Admiral, a severe, decorated woman named Grand Admiral Sauron, looked at her sensor readings, looked at the human vessels, and opened a channel. "Surrender," she said, "or be destroyed." Commander Akafer's reply was 4 words. 4 words, spoken the way you speak to someone who has just made a small social error. Please don't do this. Grand Admiral Soren had never been told no. Not in any meaningful sense. She had been given obstacles and she had removed them. She had been given enemies and she had ended them. She had built her career on the simple principle that sufficient force, applied with sufficient precision, resolved all problems. The universe was a mechanical thing. You found the right lever and you pushed. She pushed now. 212 ships opened fire simultaneously. It was, by any objective measure, one of the most overwhelming concentrations of military force ever assembled in the known galaxy. The space around the Amaranth turned white. The Amaranth raised her shields, redistributed power, and sent a short burst transmission to the engineering transport that had arrived 3 days earlier. The transmission read, "They started it." What happened next took 11 minutes and 17 seconds, which is how long it appears in every official record, though the records differ on what exactly to call it. The Terran Exploratory Commission's after-action report calls it a defensive engagement. The Imperial Court's historians, writing later under considerably different political circumstances, call it the demonstration. The Keth ambassador, watching on long-range sensors, simply noted the time it started and the time it stopped and wrote underneath, "There is no word in our language for what this was." The human engineers in the transport had spent 3 days scanning Imperial ships. They knew the drive signatures. They knew the shield geometries. They knew, with the particular intimacy of people who love mechanical systems and had just been given 212 new ones to study, exactly where every weak point was. The Amaranth did not fight like a survey ship. She fought like a scalpel, precise, minimal, purposeful. Every shot targeted propulsion or weapon systems. Nothing vital, nothing irreversible. The engineering transport, which had weapons no one had thought to ask about because it was a transport, worked the outer formation with similar precision. Imperial ships went dark one by one, not destroyed, disabled. Power systems neutralized, drives offline, weapons silenced, hulls intact. It had the quality of someone carefully and methodically tidying a room. At the 11-minute mark, Grand Admiral Soren's flagship had no propulsion, no weapons, no shields, and all life support still functioning. She sat in her command throne in the dark. Emergency lighting had kicked in, a dim red glow, and looked at her dead instruments. The channel opened. Grand Admiral, Commander Akafer, steady, quiet, carrying something that sounded almost like sympathy. "Are any of your crew injured? We have medical staff." Soren said nothing. "We're going to begin repair assistance on your outer formation ships first. They took the most fire from their own fleet's discharge. Our engineer tells me the drive systems on the second-tier cruisers are relatively straightforward to restart, so those crews shouldn't be stuck too long." A pause. "Why?" Soren said. Her voice was under control, but only barely. "Why are you repairing us?" "Because you need it," Akafer said simply. "And because we might want to be friends later. It's hard to be friends with people you've destroyed. We've found that historically." Soren sat in the red dark of her dead flagship. "What do you want?" she asked. "A conversation," Akafer said, "with someone who can actually make decisions. No offense to you, Grand Admiral, you were following orders same as your crews, but we'd like to talk to whoever gave them." In the silence that followed, 212 Imperial ships drifted through the nebula's light, intact, powerless, and being carefully repaired by the people who had just defeated them. It was the strangest thing Soren had ever seen. The Emperor had never left the capital, not once in 40 years of rule. He left now. His personal transport, a vessel of extraordinary luxury, crewed by 500, carrying the full ceremonial apparatus of Imperial authority, traveled to the Vale Nebula at maximum speed. This fact alone communicated something to every political entity monitoring the situation. Emperors did not travel to negotiations. Negotiations came to emperors. The symbolism was seismic. He arrived to find his two greatest fleets floating quietly in the nebula, repaired and refueled by human crews who had apparently brought enough supplies to assist because it seemed like the polite thing to do. His Grand Admiral met him in the transport bay with the expression of a person who had been fundamentally recalibrated. The meeting took place aboard the Amaranth, which was Priya's suggestion, and which the Emperor's advisors had objected to for about 30 seconds before Priya noted, gently, that the alternative was the Emperor traveling to a human ship that was designed for this, which would be a longer trip for him. The advisors considered this and agreed the Amaranth was fine. The Emperor was older than Velthar had expected, quieter. He walked through the Amaranth's corridors with his retinue and took things in, the layered redundancy of the engineering bays, the wall of emergency equipment beside every major junction, the sheer functional density of every surface. He stopped at Gerald's lab, where the botanist had arranged his nebula-collected samples in careful rows, and looked at them for a moment without speaking. "Your empire," the Emperor said finally, seated across from Priya in the ship's small conference room, "encompasses how many systems?" 12 currently. We're expanding slowly. We like to survey first." He absorbed this. "We have 412. "I know, you said in the opening transmission it was a good transmission." She paused, very dramatic. Something crossed the Emperor's face that his counselors had never seen before. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "You laughed at it." "We did. I'm still sorry about that." "No," he said slowly. "I don't think you are." He looked at her steadily. "I want to understand something. Your ships, the weapons, the shielding, the engineering. Your civilization has had this capability for how long?" "The current generation of ships, about 40 years. "And you haven't expanded beyond 12 systems." "We don't particularly want to," Priya said. "We want to understand things. We like surveying. We like learning what's out there." She paused. "We're very good at surviving things. We built the ships that way because space is dangerous and we kept nearly dying in it, so we over-engineered everything until we stopped nearly dying quite as much. The weapons were almost an afterthought. We realized at some point that if you build a reactor that can run a full science suite plus life support plus emergency reserves, you also accidentally build a weapons platform. We didn't go looking for that." The Emperor sat with this for a long time. The treaty that emerged over the next 3 days was unlike any document in imperial history. No subjugation clause, no tribute, no territorial concession. What it was, in essence, was a mutual recognition. Two civilizations agreeing to know each other existed, to not shoot at each other, and to exchange information freely. The imperial historians spent months arguing about what to call it. The Amaranth's crew called it the Treaty of the Veil. The name stuck. Velthar was appointed the first imperial ambassador to humanity. He found the role simultaneously humbling and strange, mostly because the humans treated him with complete normalcy, invited him to sit in on research meetings, asked his opinion on things, let him wander the science decks without escort. He found Priya 6 months later, during a follow-up survey mission he'd requested to join. She was watching the nebula through the observation window, the same one Gerald had asked the Imperial ships about. "I need to ask you something," Velthar said. "It has bothered me since the first day." "Go ahead." The laughter. He searched for the right words. "When you heard our declaration, why? You didn't know yet how powerful your ships were relative to ours. You didn't know how the engagement would go. Why did you laugh?" Priya was quiet for a moment, looking out at the light spreading through the nebula's gas. Violet and amber, enormous and slow, indifferent to everything. "Humans laugh," she said, "when we're nervous, when we're relieved, and when something is so much bigger than us, so dramatic and serious and certain of itself that the only response that fits is absurdity." She glanced at him. "We came out here not knowing what we'd find. 64 warships telling us to surrender or die, that's terrifying. And it's also, from a certain angle, completely absurd. Both things were true at once. The laughter was the only way to hold both." Velthar thought about this for a long time. In the Empire, he said finally, we respond to fear with silence, or aggression. I know, Priya said, we noticed. Outside, the nebula drifted on ancient, vast, full of things no one had mapped yet. What did you find? Velthar asked. Out here before us on the survey. Priya smiled. New spore distribution patterns. Gerald is thrilled. Velthar looked at the nebula, thought about 412 systems, and 12, and the impossible geometry of how the second number had defeated the first in 11 minutes while repairing its enemy's ships. You are very strange people, he said. Yes, Priya agreed, without any indication this bothered her at all. We really are.